for End in Mind education. And I wanted to talk about the warm-up and give you an example of what that could look like in a RLA setting or in a social studies setting, for example. You could probably use a similar approach in science and math as well. But let's look at the warm-up, and it's basically going to be a quote, an Eleanor Roosevelt quote. So hypothetically, we're doing an Eleanor Roosevelt lesson, her accomplishments, and the warm-up would be, if life were predictable, it would cease to be life. Eleanor Roosevelt. So I would basically have that on the board and let the students come in and jot it down, and then they're going to reflect on it and explain the meaning of the quote and describe her personality based on the quote. Say something about her personality based on that quote. They can turn and talk about it, and you give them 2 to 3 minutes to do this, and you're gonna basically suddenly get them thinking about Eleanor Roosevelt and what they're gonna be learning about on that day. So this is the warm-up aspect of the Magnificent Six. Now for the objective, you could potentially use something like, by the end of the lesson, you want it to be time-bound. I will decide on 3 modern issues that an Eleanor Roosevelt style leader would take on, using at least 3 examples. So basically what you're doing here is taking the classroom experience, the classroom learning, and then turning it into a measurement that a teacher can use to decide how effective the classroom experience was. You want objectives, of course, to be measurable, and this is a critical part of it, in that if you set a objective early that is measurable, when you come to the conclusion or the measurement aspect of the Magnificent Six, then you're going to find that it fits right in and it integrates perfectly, and that's where you have the conclusion to your scientific method. The question portion of the Magnificent Six, the 6 elements of every lesson plan, and this is the part of the lesson where you're going to engage students in an extended discussion. You obviously have time constraints, so you can't do it throughout. You can have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 questions, but you want 3 questions that will give your class an opportunity to think deeply, converse, and maybe even write about the topic of the day in a critical way. So for example, let's look at the Eleanor Roosevelt example. And one question you could ask is, how did society benefit from Eleanor Roosevelt's activism? They can turn and talk and discuss that, and then of course you will look for hands to respond, and you can ask further questions using almost the Socratic method. Another question you could ask is, how does Eleanor Roosevelt's work on the Declaration of Human Rights protect citizens today? And of course, in the content portion that we haven't talked about yet, you will include some of those details. It would be included in a video, in the lecture, in a short reading, and on and on. So then, of course, the students would get an opportunity to turn and talk and discuss that, and then, of course, you would elicit responses from the classroom. And finally, now, all these questions are not asked consecutively, but they are parts integrated in different parts of the lesson to break up the lesson into some solo time and some group time, group discussion time, whole group discussion time. Finally, another question could be, discuss the pros and cons of a modern Eleanor Roosevelt style candidate running for office. How would she be received? And you can continue the question with what criticisms would she face in modern society, or what challenges would she face in modern society if she kept her approach today in today's politics. So you can update a lesson on a person who is from the 1940s and bring it to the present through this system. And that's the questioning portion, or the key questions. We're going to talk about the skills and knowledge part of the lesson. This is critical. This is the content part of the lesson for this particular Eleanor Roosevelt lesson that you want students to be familiar with to be able to do all the other things that you're going to require them to do. For example, we need to know that Eleanor Roosevelt changed the role of the First Lady. She was involved in labor and with labor, fighting for better working conditions, better wages, and so on and so forth. She helped the underprivileged and served the underprivileged, went around and worked in soup kitchens and so forth. She was involved in the suffrage movement, particularly the women's suffrage movement, trying to get women politically involved in society, in government, right, in the running of government. She also had a syndicated column, where she talked to people and she talked to them about their day-to-day problems. And of course, she was involved in the civil rights movement as well, with the organization, the advancement of colored people as well. So she had a far-reaching effect and was very influential in many social, political, economic aspects of her society. And this is the knowledge part of the lesson, and this is where the note-taking takes place. And the students are going to go back to this as they're completing the different tasks and answering the different questions that you have in that lesson throughout the day. I wanted to talk to you about the activity section of the Magnificent Six, and this is where you're going to engage students in some sort of product that they're later going to present and be able to explain and approach in a critical manner, faced with a series of questions that they're going to have to answer, and that's all going to be integrated and embedded in each activity. And there's no one activity that would fulfill this role, but you could use graphic organizers or posters, or have students do a speech, or have them create a video, a comic, an editorial, magazine covers, or a children's book. Really, ultimately, offering them a menu, a choice of activity that they could do is really probably your best bet to engage your audience fully. There's a big difference between me choosing something for you and you choosing something for yourself. So this is really the vehicle by which the information or the skill is going to be transferred, and students will have the opportunity to then interact with that material and digest the material, or practice that skill multiple times. And this is where you can have students working together. If it's a thoughtful and purposeful approach, have them turn and talk, have them use each other as peer support. And of course, the teacher would be an active participant in the creation. This is, I find, is one of the parts that is lacking the most when there's a project. These projects can take anywhere between 1 day and 3 days, I would recommend, depending on the importance of the curriculum and the importance of the information that's being taught at the time. Welcome. Today we have reached the conclusion of our lesson. I like to call it the measurement phase, and it's critical that we look at it as such so that we can then later reflect and measure on the success of our lesson. If the lesson was on Eleanor Roosevelt, well, we want to use the information that we learned and discussed throughout the lesson in this final conclusion or measurement phase of the learning experience. Now, this could be anywhere from 18 minutes to 8 minutes. It depends on several things. It depends on your class and so on and so forth. So you adjust as you go, and you would know your class, and you would know. And once they know what to expect at the end, they'll complete this part of the lesson before you even assign it. That's how nice it is. Once you have a system in place, once you have the Magnificent Six in place, the students will know what to expect, and they'll have a full, complete answer for you, so you can call on them and they can tell you about Eleanor Roosevelt. And one example is how we can update it and make it relevant to students is by asking a question such as, how would an Eleanor Roosevelt type political candidate fare in modern politics? In other words, describe 3 ideas that she had that would be popular today, and also explain how they would be challenged or criticized as well. Because for every political position, there's always an opposition, and that will criticize that particular idea or philosophy. So where would she be in terms of her relevance, in terms of her, and if you look at the content section of the lesson, the knowledge skills section of the lesson, it talks about many of her ideas. And are they still relevant? Which ones? Which 3? Pick 3 that are relevant today, and then look at the opposite side. Turn and talk to your partner and decide how would she face